Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf Kuf Aleph. Today's daf is sponsored by Betsy Frank in honor of Penny's Daf Yomi Salan. And today's daf is sponsored by Danny Wenninger in loving memory of Yochai Chai Glam, Lidor Yosef Karavani, and Asaf Hamami, Giborei Yisrael who fought and fell defending Israel. May their memories be a blessing. Okay, we'll get started today. 2 quick announcements. Just remind everyone it's year end and we're having our Big Circle of Friends campaign. So thank you to all those who've already joined. And if you haven't yet, you can still take care of it. You can even take care of it after the end of the year. But if you want to get it in before the end of the year, you can do it now. You can do it through a donor advised fund. You can do it through just a link on our site by credit card. So thank you for all those who've already supported. It's very important to keep our programs going, which we're going to hopefully publicize in the next day or so, the upcoming Siyum, which will be on January 11th on Sunday. And also we have a very exciting event coming up. We're going to have a workshop in Israel for those of you who are here. Maybe you're visiting. It's actually during, we planned it specifically during vacation week. We're going to have a menachot workshop. There's a bakery of the breads of the Beit HaMikdash, which we've mentioned before in class, and we're going to go there and learn how they did the minchas. It's going to be a great introduction to Masechet Menachot. Once you actually make the breads, you'll see how amazing it is. The registration will open on Sunday, and there's limited spaces. There's only about room for 25, so it'll be first come, first serve. People can end up on a waiting list if so, but it'll be on January 19th. Okay, Monday, January 19th. We're also going to have a Hebrew one on January 26th, so you can sign up for either one of them if Hebrew's fine for you. And yeah, we're looking forward to having an event. I think it'll be great, and get together with learners. Okay, let's get started. Today we're finally going to tackle head on this issue of the whole thing that happened with Aaron and Moshe, when Moshe gets all upset at Aaron that he burned on the 8th day of the miluim. Okay, let's give a little bit of background again. We're talking about the Chanukat HaMishkan. So they were doing the whole big dedication ceremony of the Mishkan. Okay, a few crazy things happened. The one that's much more known is that Nadav and Avihu died. Right, that was a terrible catastrophe. Happened on the 8th day of the miluim. Vayihi bayom hashmini, Parshat Shmini. Happens on the 8th day of the miluim. And then after that, as if that wasn't bad enough, then we get into this whole thing where basically Moshe gets upset at Aaron and said, "Why did you burn the sin offering?" Okay, and then Aaron, and basically Moshe goes on this whole long conversation with him. In fact, I'm going to bring up the psukim right now and we're going to read them. Let me just share my screen. So on the 8th day of the miluim, okay, Aaron and his sons have a whole bunch of things they're supposed to do. Okay, and his sons that are left in Vayikra Yud, we're in verse Yud Bet. Okay, so chapter 10, verse 12. Moshe speaks to Aaron, Elazar, and Itamar, Banav and Otorim, the sons who were left over, meaning the left because they didn't get killed. Take the mincha, okay, the extra mincha that's left from the miluim, okay, and basically eat it. Okay, eat it b'makom kadosh. And then he says, Kikein tsuveti, because this is what I was commanded. Okay, that's for the mincha offering, apropos menachot that we were just discussing. Then there's the shlamim. Now, the part of the shlamim, okay, that goes to the kohen is the chazeh and the shok, okay, the chest and the thigh. So then he says, also that you should eat b'makom kadosh, okay, blah, 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 I'm skipping, kasher tziva Hashem. He says, also like God commanded. Okay, we're going to see kasher tziva Hashem or kasher tzuveti or kasher tziviti. It's going to come up 3 times, which is where we're going to start today. Why did it come up 3 times? Then he gets to the sin offering, and after he says, eat the mincha, eat the shlamim, he says, the sin offering, okay, I'm going to read you the psukim, and I want you to pay close attention to these psukim. We're going to darshan them later today, but let's just read through the first time from start to finish. So I'm in verse 16. Ve'et se'ir chatat. So now when it comes to the goat sin offering, which we're going to see there are actually 3, okay, but it sounds like there's 1. Darash Moshe. Moshe looked for it. We're going to see why it says it in double language. We'll get to that later in the daf today. V'hinei soraf. Moshe was looking for it, and it turns out it was burned. Moshe's immediate reaction. Vayiktzaf Elazar v'alei Tamar b'nei Aaron anotarim limor. He gets very angry at the 2 sons of Aaron and says to them, Why didn't you eat the meat of the sin offering in the sanctified place, meaning in the Azara? He kodesh kodeshimu, because first of all, it's kodesh kodeshim. We're supposed to eat it in a sanctified place. And that's your job. This sin offering was for you to basically bear the sins of the nation, to atone for them. You were supposed to get atonement before God. Through the sin offering. Why didn't you eat it? Why did you burn it? Then he continues and he says, it's not like the blood was brought into the inner sanctuary. Remember, you can't take the sin offering blood and bring it into the inner sanctuary. If so, it's disqualified. And therefore, you should eat it in the sanctified area like I told you, or you should have. Now you can't because it's too late. So it's interesting. He says it to Elazar and Itamar, pipes in Aharon. And Aaron comes and has the last word here. He says, V'yidaber Aharon Moshe. I'm not going to exactly translate this yet because we're going to see two completely different interpretations. But behold today, or they today, or something, I don't know. Well, let's just leave it. Something today, they sacrificed chatatam ve'etolatam l'fnei Hashem. They sacrificed it before God. Vatikrena oti ka'ela. And these terrible things befell me, meaning my sons died. Va'achalti chatat hayom. What, I'm supposed to eat a sin offering today on a day that I'm in mourning for my children? Hayitav b'nei Hashem. What, you think that's what God wants? Which sounds like what he's basically saying is, I'm an onen. Now, we know all about this. We've been learning about it. And by the way, if you haven't listened to Din and Daf from last week, Alana's Din and Daf was all about aninut. So definite good listen. Anyway, says here, I'm an onen. I can't eat korbanot. Is that what God wants when I'm an onen, to eat the korbanot? No way, no how. Vayishma Moshe v'yitab beinav. So Moshe listens, and he said, you're right. And after getting very angry, Moshe realizes, I made a mistake. Okay, so we're going to have to understand this because it's super confusing. We've made mention to this big machloket here. We've made mention of it in the past, but today we're going to learn it head on and really tackle the whole sugya. So we're going to start with the second line of today's daf, Tanu Rabbanan. The first is a braita that basically says, why does it say 3 times, okay, as we see here bolded, Ki kein tsuveti, ka'asher tsiveti, ka'asher tziva Hashem. Okay, besides it says it 3 times, first of all, they take it out of order. If you notice, they go first to the mincha, then they skip to the chatat, and then they go to the middle one in the shlamim. But it's not so significant. Tsuveti means I was commanded, Moshe says, by God. Tziviti is I commanded you. And kasher tziva Hashem is God commanded. Okay, so why is it 3 different ones in 3 different languages, and why repeat it so many times? Ki kein tsuveti, ba'aninut yochlua. I was commanded that you're supposed to eat this even though you're an onen. That's number 1. Okay, which is going to have to then beg the question, then why did Aaron say I can't eat it when I'm an onen, and then Moshe listened to him? It's a little bit weird. If Moshe was commanded that they can eat it even though they're an onen, okay, the point being here, this is a special day. Normally, kohanim can't eat it when they're an onen, but there's a special decree here, or a special dispensation, or a special whatever, a special commandment, that because this is such an important day, you're allowed to eat them even though you're an onen. Ka'asher tziveti, when I commanded you, when was that? B'shat ma'aseh amar lehen. So he says, at the time I told you that you're supposed to eat it. Now, this is unclear. There's a machloket among the commentaries, what's the time at the moment of the action? Is it the action, meaning when the sons died, and Moshe then said, okay, you're an onen, but you have to eat anyway? Or is it when you burned it, and kind of after you burned it, then I said to you, why didn't you eat it? Why did you burn it? Because I commanded you, you're supposed to eat it. So unclear exactly what that is. But kasher tziva Hashem, lo me'elai ani omer. Okay, by the way, don't think I made this up myself. When I commanded you, it was because God had commanded me. Okay. The main idea here that we want to get at is the first one, which is ba'aninut yochlua. So according to this, and you can look at the chart on the page, is it permitted for someone to eat when they're for them, was it permitted for Aaron and his sons to eat it when they were in onen? Yes. Okay, that's what it says. Ki kein tsuveti. Right, I'm sorry. Yeah. Kein tsuveti, Moshe was commanded specifically that you can eat it when you're an onen. Uribini, but this completely contradicts the following source. Mipnei aninut nisrefa, Why was it burned? We're going to see there's a machloket about this. But why was it burned? According to one opinion, because of aninut. Okay, it was burned because they were an onain. L'chach ne'amar ka'ela. That's why Aaron says. That's why Aaron says, when these terrible things befell me, what? Is it appropriate for me to eat in front of God? Meaning, right? Is it appropriate to me to eat the korban? Of course not. I'm an onain. This sounds like he wasn't allowed to eat because he was an onain, right? And then Moshe listens to him and accepts what he says. So we have a complete contradiction here. To resolve this contradiction, so one source says they were allowed to eat an aninut, the other source says no. So we're going to have two ways to resolve this. Amar Shmuel. Lo kasha, ha-Rabbi Yehuda, ha-Rabbi Nechemia. These are two completely different approaches. They're two different approaches, and that's going to be the basis of our daf today. How to understand these two approaches, how do each of them read the psukim. But first we're just going to get the two approaches. Ditanya, mipne, so we're not going to really fully understand this yet, but as the daf goes on, we will get to understand this better. Mipne aninut tzrafua, l'chach ne'amar ka'ele, divrei Rabbi Nechemia. Okay, that's what we just said. Okay? It was burned because they were an onain, and that's why Aaron says, these terrible things befell me. Of course I'm not going to eat. And Moshe agrees. And that's why he was burned. Rabbi Yehuda, and that matches the second braita. It's exactly what the second braita said. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon omrim, mipnei tum'an esrafa. She'im ata omer mipnei aninut esrafa, hayu l'shoshtan she'yisarfu. The first thing they say, let's just break it into two. Okay? First, they just give their opinion. It wasn't burnt because of aninut. It was burnt because of impurity. Okay, meaning the sacrifice became impure at some point. Now, we're going to have to understand this. When did it happen and why and what does it have to do with anything? We don't see impurity anywhere in the psukim, if you noticed. So, but that's what they say. It somehow got impure, and that's why they burned it. Remember, should they become impure, you burn them. That's what happens. Now, here goes. There are three reasons why they disagree with Rabbi Nechemia and why they think Rabbi Nechemia is completely wrong. And we're going to see, now, if meitum anisrefa, it means that they were allowed to eat it when they were in onain, and that's why this matches the first braita. Because the first braita said that Moshe learned, right, was commanded by God that they're allowed to eat when they're in onain. So they were allowed to eat it. It was just that it became impure in the meanwhile. Now, here come the three arguments they have, why they're convinced that that's the case. Now, they have to be more convincing. Why do they have to be more convincing? Because it seems much more clear from the pshat. After these terrible things befell me, would it be appropriate to eat in front of God? It sounds like aninut is the issue. But they don't think so. So now they're going to prove it by basically raising three difficulties with Rabbi Nechemia. We don't have answers to these three difficulties on Rabbi Nechemia. We're going to deal with it later in the daf. And later, the daf is going to come back to this and say, how would Rabbi Nechemia respond to each of these three questions? Okay, question one. If it was because of aninut, okay, we're going to see later there were 3 korbanot chatat. Okay, we'll get to it later, so I'll wait. I'll leave it for later. There were 3 seirei izim that they brought for korban chatat. Okay, now all of them should have been burned if it was because of aninut. If they weren't allowed to eat because they were in onain, then they should have burned all 3. Davar acher, haya ra'oi lo'chlan la'erev. Just because there's aninut during the day, aninut at night. Now here's interesting. Remember Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon? They have a machloket. Is there aninut at night by Torah law, Rabbi Yehuda, or Rabbi Shimon who says by rabbinic law? But what you're going to understand here is that even though there's aninut by Torah law at night, according to Rabbi Yehuda, and by Rabbi Shimon it's going to be easy because it's only D'Rabbanan. So because they had this chatat to eat, and because it was the Yomei Miluim, that at least was permitted to them. Okay, so in other words, they should have. Maybe they were in onain during the day and couldn't eat it because they were in onain during the day. But, if you say because of aninut, but they should have been able, according to you, Rabbi Nechemia, what you're saying, it was all because of aninut, they should have been able to eat it at night. Okay, because again, even if aninut at night is doraita, everyone agrees that it's not the same as during the day. During the day is the real aninut. Because remember, why is aninut? Because you're busy dealing with your maid and upset. But by night already, well, first of all, you're not dealing with things at night in those days. Certainly nothing went on at nighttime. Unfortunately, these days we're dealing with things all night long because we can still do lots of things at night. But in those days, right, the day would end. That was it. Nothing was going on. And I guess also the sorrow wasn't as intense as it was from, when it happens. So anyway, at least at night they should have been able to eat, so there was no reason to burn it. Number 3, davar acher, halo Pinchas hayai mehem. Okay, wait a minute. Who were the kohenim at the time? There was Aaron and his sons. They were the kohenim, but also Pinchas we see as a kohen. So while they were onanim and couldn't eat it, but Pinchas could have eaten it. Now, what's the point of burning it? Because they're an onain. You don't have to burn meat just because you're an onain. But if there's no one to eat it, remember, it becomes notar, left over, and then you have to burn it. So they burned it already before because they saw there was no one who can eat it. But what do you mean? Pinchas wasn't an onain. He was related, but he wasn't a first-degree relative that is in status of onain. So nadav and avihu. So he should have been able to eat it, so they shouldn't have burnt it. So 3 problems with claiming that it was burnt because they were an onain. We'll get back to them. Okay, but that was the first resolution to this contradiction, that one says they're allowed to eat it when they're an onain, and one the other says they weren't. And we basically say, that's Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, that's Rabbi Nechemia. Now we have Rava. Rava resolves this in a different way. Rava Amal, I'll deal with this contradiction differently. Idi v'idi Rabbi Nechemia. I'm going to explain both according to Rabbi Nechemia. V'lo kashya, kam b'kodshei sha'ah, kam b'kodshei dorot. There were 3 se'ireizim l'chatat, but 2 of them were unique to the Yemei Miluim. What were they? So now I'll get into that. There was the korban of Nachshon, if you remember. All the Nesiim brought korbanot for those 12 days, starting from the 8th day of the Miluim, which, with their korbanot that all the Nesiim brought, Nachshon was the first, they brought a se'ireizim l'chatat. So that was chatat number 1. That was special for this time, a one time only. Second, they had a special chatat they brought for the miluim. Third, it was Rosh Chodesh. The 8th day of miluim was Rosh Chodesh. So on Rosh Chodesh, you always bring a se'ireizim l'chatat. So now comes the distinction. Here we go. Kodshei sha'ah, the unique ones. Okay, that's when Moshe was told they're allowed to eat it ba'aninut. Okay, I'm going to share the study guide again. We'll look at the sheet. Okay, the chart. So, kikein suveti ba'aninut yochluhu. Okay, you can eat it ba'aninut. That's okay. This is all according to Rabbi Nechemia. They burned it because of aninut, but when Moshe was told you can eat it ba'aninut, that was specifically the ones that were unique to the miluim. When Aaron said, okay, mipnei aninut nisrefa, I burned it because I was an onain, he was specifically talking about the se'ireizim l'chatat that we do on Rosh Chodesh, kodshei dorot. That has the general rules, okay? Even though there was a special dispensation to eat it when they were an onain, because of the miluim, it was only things related to specifically the miluim, not the ones that just happened to come that day, because the se'ireizim l'chatat that we eat, that we do every Rosh Chodesh, and the kohanim always eat, that is going to go under regular laws. And if you're an onain, you don't eat it. That was the one they burned, okay? And that's how you explain the contradiction between these 2 sources. Now, what we have to do is, Rabbi Nechemia, hechem etaretz l'hanikai, v'Rabbanan, hechem etaretz l'hanikai. How does Rabbi Nechemia explain all these psukim? Okay, now we're going to go back to all those psukim I read before, where Moshe gets angry at them and says this, and then Aaron answers that. Now, in what we saw in the psukim, Moshe talks, a bunch of psukim, and then Aaron chimes in at the end. And Moshe was actually talking to his sons. And then Aaron comes in and says, what are you talking about? And then Moshe listens to him. But according to the version that we're going to see now, they're each going to darshan. Okay, we're going to see how does Rabbi Nechemia do it, and the Rabbanan, or the rabbis, plural, meaning Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, how are they going to read all the different parts here? Now you can see from the chart, this was nice about charts, that they mostly agree about most things, okay? Most of these psukim we're going to read the same way. But when we get toward the end, there's going to be a bit of a difference between them, okay? About what exactly happens. So Rabbi Nechemia retired luhachi. Madua lo achaltem. Okay, so Moshe starts off and says, why didn't you eat the chatat bimkom hakodesh? So Amar lo Moshe laHaron. So now we're going to have this question and answer. Moshe says to Aaron, Shema nechnas dama lefanai v'lifnim. Okay, he starts out thinking maybe there's a good reason. So he says, maybe you brought the blood inside. Okay, Amar lo, hey lo huvat dama. Okay, even though this was in Moshe's words, right? Remember, Moshe said, why'd you burn it? The blood wasn't brought inside, but according to the conversation, this drasha, is that Moshe said, maybe you brought the blood inside? And Aaron said, no. Hey, this we put in Aaron's mouth. Hey, lo huvat dama ela kodesh pnima. No, I didn't bring the blood into the inner sanctuary. which again would have disqualified. Next, Shema chutz l'mechitzata yatsa. Now they go the other direction. Maybe you took it outside, right? Maybe, remember, there's either you bring it in too much or you bring it out of the azara, would also disqualify. Amar lo bakodesh hayta. Now here, it's a little bit tricky how they get this. Okay, I'm going to go back up to the psukim and you're going to see. So again, Moshe says, why don't you eat the chatap b'mkom hakodesh? Because it's kodesh kodeshim and that you were given. To which, right, hein lo huvat amal kodesh pnima. So this, again, instead of Moshe saying, its blood wasn't brought inside, and therefore Moshe then says, achol tochlu otaba kodesh kasher tziviti. Go eat it in the kodesh. But again, this is more the way they darshan it. It's a conversation. Did you bring the blood? He said no. Then, where do we get, did you bring the blood outside? Well, it's a little bit of a really not simple reading here. When Moshe says, go eat it in the Kodesh, and that you should have eaten it in the Kodesh like I commanded you, we're darshaning this word Bakodesh. Bakodesh means, again, there's a whole conversation around this one word. Bakodesh means that Moshe asked, maybe you took it out of the Kodesh? And Aaron answers, no. It was in the Azara the whole time. It didn't get disqualified for that reason. Okay? So this version, by the way, it's funny because interesting. The simple reading is Moshe got very angry at them, right? By himself, he got angry immediately and jumped to all sorts of conclusions, and in the end he was wrong. According to this, Moshe tries to justify, maybe you did this, maybe you did that. It's a much more gentle conversation, not out of anger, but out of, maybe this. Okay? Third question of Moshe. Dilma ba'aninut akrivtua upsaltua. Maybe you were in, because of aninut. Now, this is different than we talked about before. This isn't about eating it. This is maybe you sacrificed it when you were in onen. And a kohen's not allowed to sacrifice when they're in onen. Remember, the kohen has to, kohen versus kohen gadol. Remember? The kohen is not allowed to do sacrifices when they're in onen. They can't work in the temple. They have to leave the temple immediately. Aaron, the kohen gadol, is not allowed to leave the temple. So, now, remember, Moshe was talking to the sons. So he says maybe they sacrificed it and it's disqualified. Amarlo Moshe. So now here we get to when Aaron actually starts talking in the pasuk. Aaron says to Moshe, Hein hayom ikrivu. And I said it's very hard to translate this because we're going to see different interpretations. The way this is read is rhetorically. Hein hayom ikrivu. What? No, hein means they. They? You think they sacrificed it? V'chihem ikrivu? Ani yakavti. I did it. Don't think, it's disqualified because someone who wasn't supposed to do the avoda did it. It was me, and I'm allowed to sacrifice when I'm an onen. Okay, so it wasn't that. So we've tried 3 options, none of them. V'amar lo. So now Moshe goes back and he kind of summarizes everything, okay? Okay, so hey lo huvat ama uba kodesh hayta. So right, it wasn't inside, it wasn't outside. Achol tochlu ota kasher tziveti. You should eat it like I commanded you. But aninu yochluah. So now we're back to, well, why didn't you eat it then? I already commanded you that you could eat it when you're in onen. Why didn't you? Amar lo. But now remember, this is Rabbi Nechemia who says the whole thing is, right, he burnt it because of aninut. So now we have to explain. Batikrena oti ka'ela. Okay, we're up to the third to last section in the chart. Now here's where it starts to get different. Until this point, they're all in agreement that basically Moshe asked these 3 questions, right? Did you bring it inside? Did you bring it outside? Did you sacrifice it when you were in onen? Meaning, did your son sacrifice it? And Aaron said, no, I did. But now Aaron says the following, because now Moshe says, well, then you should have eaten it when you were in onen, like I was commanded. But right, because again, this day is different than all other days, and you have a special heter to eat them. So why did you burn it? So now Aaron says, all these terrible things happened to me, right? And I'm going to eat this? Would that be good in the eyes of God? How do we understand this? That was just the pasuk. Maybe when God told you, he was only talking about the ones that are special for today. And not the sin offering that comes every Rosh Chodesh. Because if you're talking about the sin offering that comes every Rosh Chodesh, Kal v'chomer mi-maaser akal. You can make a simple kal v'chomer from maaser. Maaser is much lighter. Uma maaser akal amrat Torah lo achalti ba'oni mimenu. You're not allowed to eat maaser when you're in onen. Okay, the maaser sheni that we eat. Because sheidorot lo kol sheken. All the more so, sanctified items, of course we can't eat. So Since this is a sacrifice that's going to be brought for generations, obviously that sacrifice would be different. And that's why Miyav Yishma Moshe v'yitav be'einav, immediately Moshe hears, and it was good in his eyes. Hoda, now here, how did they darshan vayishma? He heard. Okay, now we assume it means he heard Aaron's argument and conceded to it, but we're going to see even more, which is Hoda v'lo bosh Moshe lomar lo shamati. There's a great lesson, right? He admitted and wasn't embarrassed to say, I didn't hear. And he didn't try to say, oh, I didn't hear. But Ela Amal Shamati v'Shachachti. He said, oh, I heard. Vayishma means I even heard this from God, but I forgot. Okay, Moshe is willing to admit his mistakes. Okay, that's a really important lesson. Okay, so we learned actually two important lessons if we zoom out or look at side points here, okay, as opposed to the main point, which is, well, Aaron was basically saying that I was allowed to do this because I was an onain. And so why are you bothering me? Like, this, and I was allowed to burn it because I couldn't eat it because I was in onain. And again, specifically, this explains very well, by the way, the question we asked before. Why did he burn only one and not the other two? Because the other two were special, unique korbanot for that day, and those he actually was allowed to eat. The only one he wasn't allowed to eat, that was the one he burnt. Now, the two side things you learn are, number one, how we softened Moshe's tone. He wasn't angry from the beginning. He tried to, as we say, laduna ta'adam b'chaf zchut, right, to find that maybe Aaron was justified in what he did at first. When he couldn't, then he said, okay, well, now I really don't get it. And then when he was corrected, he says, oh yeah, you know what, I did learn that and I forgot. And he comes forward and admits his mistake. Okay, that was all the version according to Rabbi Nechemia. Now we're going to see it according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, which is going to be, as I said, the whole beginning is very similar. Then we're going to go off a little bit on something different. Obviously, because they hold something different. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, hechim mitartzelu. So how did they read the psukim? Hechim mitartzelu. This is how they read it. Okay. Madua lo achalta mitachat b'mkom hakodesh. Again, why didn't you eat it? Moshe says to Aaron, Shema nechnas amal afanai b'lifnim. Maybe the blood went all the way inside. Amar lo, hein lo huvat amal hakodesh pnima. No, we didn't do that. Shema chutz l'mechitzatay yatzat. Maybe it went out. Amar lo, hein b'kodesh haytat. No, the whole time it was in the kodesh. Dilma ba'aninut akriv tu'o psal tu'ah. Maybe you sacrificed it when you were in onain and disqualified it. Amar lo, Moshe, hein ikrivuah. The possible aninut. What, you think they did it? No, ani ikrivtia. I did it. Okay, so far that was the same. Now we start off a little different. Vidilma, okay, by the way, I just want to point out we're skipping, we're going to come back to it later. At this stage, in the other section, we already got to okay, so you didn't do this, you didn't do that, why didn't you eat it? But here, first before we get to that line, we're going to have another question, a fourth question. Dilma aga miraraichu pashatu bavi itame. Now this is a bit of a foreshadowing. Moshe says, maybe because you were so bitter, meaning you were so sad about the death of your sons, that you weren't careful and you actually got it impure. Maybe, something happened. Now, we know that that's what happens at the end according to this opinion, but not yet. Amar lo, Moshe, kachani be'enecha shani mevazeh kodesh shamayim. What, do you think of me that I would disgrace kodesh shamayim? Now, here we're going to read it into the pasuk. Vatikrena oti ka'eleh. When these things befall me, now we thought it meant, what do you mean, my sons just died and I'm going to eat because I'm onain? But that's not according to this version. So how does he read this? Afilu ele v'cha'ele. But Tikrena is actually talking about the future. If such a thing were to befall me like this again, in other words, even if I had double what happened to me, let's say all my 4 sons had been killed, you think I would disgrace God? No way. In other words, I'm very careful about Tum and Tara, which is weird because in the end we're going to say it did become impure. But he's basically saying, of course I was careful with it, and of course nothing, I didn't disgrace it. And even if such a terrible thing were to happen to me, even double, of course I would still be careful. Amarlo. Okay, now we're going to get to that. Then after we get question 4 here, now we're going to go back and summarize. So, so if you didn't do this, right, you didn't do that, they only go back to review 2 of the questions, but then you should have eaten it. So why'd you burn it? B'aninut yochlua, right? You should have eaten it b'aninut. Amarlo, shema lo shamata ela balayla. Now here, Aaron says something more. He says, maybe when God told you I can eat aninut, maybe he only meant at night. De'i b'yom, okay, now we're going to distinguish, we talked about this before, night and day. De'i b'yom kavachomer mimaser hakal. Ma maser hakal amra Torah lo achalti boni mimenu kodesh chamor lo kol sheken. He says, I know you think that I could eat this aninut, but I think that when God said that, maybe he only said it at nighttime, not during the day. Because it really makes no sense that God would permit me during the day. Just like maaser, obviously kodesh. If I can't eat maaser when I'm an onen, of course I can't eat kodesh. So it must be that when God said I could eat it at night. And to that, Miyah v'yishma Moshe treninan amabet v'yita be'enav labosh Moshe lomar lo shamati ela shamati v'shachachti. And Moshe says, you're right. You're right. You could have eaten it at night. Okay? That's where we get to right now. Okay, we're missing something very important here because what do they say? They say, right, the Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, that he burnt it because it was impure. Where does that come from? And if they could eat it at night, so they could eat it at night, right? Remember, the chatah can be eaten during the day and that night. So if aninut was removed, the prohibition for the nighttime, they still should have been able to eat. So the Gemara is going to ask, so they should have left it and eaten it at night. They shouldn't have burned it. Like, we're still missing, even though we just went through all the psukim, we're missing the big major point, which is how do you get to mipnei tum'ah? And even Aaron had said, I was careful about tum'ah. So what did they answer? Tum'ah be'ones ba'ata. What happened? Well, they should have eaten it during the day, ideally in a regular situation. You eat it as soon as you can. Why do you eat as soon as you can? Because you never know what's going to happen to it. But they couldn't do that because they weren't allowed to eat because they weren't owning during the day. That was what Aaron just proved to Moshe. That Moshe forgot. Even though God commanded they could eat it b'aninut, what God meant is at night. Because already we said, remember, even Rabbi Yehuda holds doraita, nighttime is doraita, but still in this situation, there was a special dispensation that they were allowed to eat it at night, but not during the day. That's where he differs from Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia thought it was even permitted to them during the day. But because of that, they pushed it off till nighttime. And now, what did Aaron say? I was so careful about impurity, but apparently something happened anyway. Even though he was careful, onus is, beyond any circumstances, like it was a very unexpected circumstance. And somehow it got impure, and therefore they burned it. Okay? So that explains that approach. So now we're going to do a bit of questions on the different approaches. Okay, I'm going to go back and share the study guide, and we're going to see the different questions that come up here. Okay, one second. Okay, so the first question is, Bishlama l'Rabbanan. Okay, now we're going to ask, we're on the second side of the study guide. Bishlama l'Rabbanan hainu dichtiv v'achalti chatat. Okay, I'm reading it from the study guide because they don't bring the whole pasuk, and there's two different hayoms. I want you to focus, figure out which one is which. When Aaron says achalti chatat hayom hayitav b'nei Hashem, so we understand why he said, "What am I going to eat chatat hayom hayitav b'nei Hashem?" Because what did the rabbis, meaning Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, said? We just said that a minute ago. They can't eat kodshim during the day. So, right, what Aaron's saying in that pasuk is, "What was I supposed to eat the chatat today? Of course not." Okay, God even didn't allow me to eat it today. And again, then you have to add the words. And that's why I left it for nighttime, and that's why accidentally something happened to it. It wasn't my fault, but beyond my control, something terrible happened, it became impure, and that's why I burned it. Eli Rabbi Nechemia, my hayom. Why does it say, Achalti chatat hayom yitab b'nei Hashem? Didn't they already say that hayom, right? Moshe said, I was commanded that you can't eat today. So why does he say, I can't eat today because I'm a no-name? What do you mean? Moshe had already told him. So how do they explain hayom? Chovat hayom. Hayom is referring specifically to, I ate the sin offering of this day, meaning of Rosh Chodesh, okay, as opposed to of the special ones of this day. Okay, there's Chovat Hayom, which is the date on the calendar. That one I'm not allowed to eat, because remember, that's the one that's for generations. So that's what he means, I ate the sin offering today, meaning if I ate the sin offering of the day, the Rosh Chodesh one, that wouldn't be appropriate in the eyes of God, even though the other ones I did eat, and I could eat. Okay, so we resolved that first question against Rabbi Nechemia. Now we have a question of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. A different word, hayom. Bishlama le Rabbi Nechemia, hainu dichtiv hein hayom. According to Rabbi Nechemia, we understand why he says Hein Hayom Ikrivu. Now here, Hein is going to mean behold Hayom Ikrivu, meaning now if Hayom is the korban of the day, so what they're saying is the korban was brought for the obligation of the day, and that's why I couldn't eat it. Okay, because remember, I had to burn it because I was in onen. So since this was like Hein, behold, this was for the day, I had to burn it because I couldn't eat it. El Rabbanan, my Hein Hayom. How did they explain Hein Hayom? Behold today. What's today any different? And what is that? It was sacrificed today. Hachi kamar. Hein ikrivu, ani ikravti. This is how we explained it before. According to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, the question is, it's said rhetorically, Hein is not behold, Hein is then. Then meaning Elazar and Itamar, his two sons. They sacrificed? No, I sacrificed. And the Hayom is not so critical, really. They don't really explain the Hayom here. But you think they're the ones who did Hayom because today they're in an onen, right? They didn't do it. I did it, and I'm the kohen gadol. I'm allowed to. Okay, so we resolved those two difficulties. Now we're going to go back to the three difficulties that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon raised on Rabbi Nechemia's position. Okay, so now we're going to explain this section. Amar Mar, Hayat lishloshtan sheyisarfu. So now they said to Rabbi Nechemia, all three of them should have been burned, right? If you basically say, Rabbi Nechemia, that they burned it because they were in onen and they couldn't eat, well, then they should have burned all three sacrifices. So first they want to know, even though I already explained to you, my shloshtan, what are the three? And then we'll get to what will Rabbi Nechemia answer to this. Ditanya, it says in a Braita, Ve'et se'ir chatah darosh darash Moshe. Remember, that's how this starts out. Moshe searches, right, and says, questions him about the se'ir chatat. Now, se'ir, we're going to see that the se'ir chatat that Moshe asked about, we're going to see is actually a reference to all three se'ir chatat. Se'ir zo se'ir nachshon, that's the one that Nachshon brought. V'nasi. Chatat zo chatat shmini, that's the special one of the miluim. Darash is the se'ir shel Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so all three are somehow, even though it sounds like it's singular form, all three, according to this drasha, are referenced in that pasuk. Now, Moshe went to look for all three. He ends up finding two, but he finds out that the third one was burned. How do we know the only one was burnt? Because the pasuk then says, after he looked into it and searched for them, Talmud Lomar v'hine soraf. It was burned. Now, it was burned is singular. It doesn't say they were burned. It says it was burned. Echad nischaf v'lo shloshtan nisrefu. So that drasha means, right, not all three were burned, only one. Okay, this Braita is only brought here to know what three we're talking about, which we already got, but since we're in the Braita, we're going to read the whole Braita. Darosh darash, shtei derishot lama. Darosh darash is double language, right? Why do you have the same word repeated? Well, he asked two questions. Amar lahen, mipnei ma chatat zo nisrafa. First question is, why did you burn this sin offering? Ve'elu munachot. And if you had a good reason for burning this one, why did you leave over the other two? Now, we already know what the answer is going to be for Rabbi Nechemia for this, but right now we're at the stage where we don't know yet. Ve'enu yodeh ezehu. Now, the Braita tells us, well, at this point, we don't even know which was the one that was burned and which one wasn't burned. Well, kashu omel, and it says then, Moshe says, remember, Otan atan lachem l'seita damon eidah. Why did you burn it? This was for the taking, right, for bearing the sin of the people to get them atonement. That's the whole point of the Rosh Chodesh se'ir. Right? That all goes back to Shavuot that we learned and other times about what that se'ir is and what Rosh Chodesh is for. Remember, it's to atone for Tumat Mikdash and all that. Okay, but for the sins of the people. Okay, that was all just to get to what were the three. Now we want to know, okay, they have three good claims against Rabbi Nechemia. What's he going to answer to it? Shapir Kamrele. So that was a good question they asked. Now, the first question is, all three should have been burned. But we already know this answer. Rabbi Nechemia l'tameh, he's consistent with his approach. Because what did he say? Da'amar kodshe sha'alo pasluhu aninut. The ones that were for that specific day, aninut is not disqualified, and onen can eat them. That was the whole special dispensation that God gave them to eat them anyway. That's why he only burned one. Okay, that was easy. Amar Mar, hayalo lo chla la'erev. But wait. They said if he was an onen, it would only be during the day, though. At night, they should have been able to eat it. And then why did they burn it? Shapir Karmelahu, that's a good claim. What's Rabbi Nechemia going to answer? Kasavar aninut laila d'oraita. Yeah, must be he holds aninut lailas d'oraita, and then you're going to have to say, and he veers from Rabbi Yehuda, who also holds that. But Rabbi Yehuda held here, though they permitted it, and Rabbi Nechemia holds no. Whatever's forbidden during the day is going to be exactly the same prohibition at night. If they couldn't eat it during the day, they couldn't eat it at night, and that's why they burned it. Third question, and this is going to lead us off on a tangent. Halo Pinchas hayai mahen, but Pinchas could have eaten it. Shaper Kamaluk, that's a good claim. Why'd they burn it? So yeah, they can't eat it when they're an onen. It doesn't mean you burn it. It means give it to some other kohen to eat. Sarva like Rabbi Elazar, you must hold like Rabbi Elazar. Damar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Nechemia. Lo nitkahen Pinchas ad shara go lezimri. When did Pinchas become a kohen? Only when he's promised, if you remember, after he kills Zimri, dichtiv aitalo lizaro harav brit kuunat olam. They are given kuunah forever, meaning he only became a kohen then. Okay, if he was a kohen before, he wouldn't need a brit kuunat olam, right? Every kohen continues forever. So only then he became a kohen. So he wasn't a kohen at the time. That's why he couldn't eat it. Rav Ashi Amar. Now we're going to get off about Pinchas, because now we're going to see it. Now we're done. We're done with those three questions. We resolved them according to Rabbi Nechemia. So what we did so far, and I'll summarize the daf at this point, what we did is, this will be our summary, we started with the psukim, right? The came to Tevet 3 times. We got to a contradiction. We resolved it by bringing in this machloket Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. That was the first way to resolve the contradiction. The second one was it's all according to Rabbi Nechemia. It's just a difference between Kodshe Sha'ah and Kodshe, the Chovat Hayom. And then we went into how did they each read the psukim, and then we went back to the difficulties that Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda raised on Rabbi Nechemia, and we resolved all three of them. Now, since we mentioned this thing about Pinchas, we're going to see that there was a machloket about when Pinchas became a kohen. Nobody thinks he was a kohen at the time. Okay, one says it was at the Zimri episode, happens in Bamidbar. Rav Ashi Amar, Sam Shalom Ben Ashvatim, until he resolved some issues made peace between the tribes. Shneimar v'yishma Pinchas HaKohen. This is way ahead in Sefer Yoshua. Okay, not in the time of the Torah. In the time of Yoshua, it calls him HaKohen, Unisiyah Davar Shelfei Israel. Okay, and then it's this whole thing about Reuven, Gad, and Moshe and all that. But without getting into the details, he's called a Kohen there. That's when he becomes a Kohen. Before that, he wasn't a Kohen. Okay, now we're going to have to actually resolve what does each one do with the other one's pasuk. So, idach nami hakti vaytalo lezarach harav. What does he do with that promise that he gets kuunah olam forever? Kikti vahi bebrachu dichtiv. That's a blessing. It doesn't mean now. It means you'll be blessed later with kuunat olam, and that's when he made peace between the people, and that's when he gets in Yoshua. Idach nami hakti vayishma Pinchas kohen. What is the one the one who says, "Go, let's go by the Torah of the time of Zimri"? What does he do with that pasuk? What does it mean that all of a sudden he now becomes a kohen? Hahuli yachesarach harav. That was actually to say he is going to have children who are kohanim gadolim. Okay, it's not kohen, regular kohen. It's kuunah gadolah, and it's a promise that at that point he then was promised his sons will be kohanim gadolim. Okay, and that's something else. Okay, done with Pinchas, but now we have another question. Based on that Pinchas question, we're going to have a problem with something Rav says. We're going to start with the statement of Rav. We're going to bring a whole slew of difficulties, and that's going to continue into tomorrow. Amar Rav, Moshe Rabbeinu, Kohen Gadol, v'cholek b'kodshei shamayim haya. Moshe Rabbeinu was a Kohen Gadol. He had status. Okay, interesting, right? He wasn't a Kohen at all, but we're going to see he had status like Kohen Gadol, and he got kodshei shamayim, like Kohanim got. He got to eat parts of the meat that only the Kohanim get. Shene'emar, me'el hamiluim l'Moshe haya l'maneh. He ate from the el miluim, which was a shlamim, but it was a shlamim that was actually kodshe kodshim. He was given that to eat. He was given a portion from there. Okay, so Moshe has Kohen Gadol status. Now we're going to have a big difficulty from what we just said. Right? And yes, and as Becky's pointing out, yes, during the miluim days, Moshe functioned like a Kohen. Okay, he did all the work the first 7 days. Okay, that was all Moshe. On the 8th day, Aaron and his sons come in. So he actually was a Kohen Gadol. So now we have a big problem. Can you figure it out? Meitive, halo Pinchas hayai mehen. Now, what do we say? The whole question against Rabbi Nechemia was, well, if the whole issue was aninut only, it wasn't tumah, shouldn't have been burned because Pinchas could have eaten it. But im ita, if Moshe was a Kohen and could eat kodshim, lema halo Moshe Rabbeinu hayai mehem. Why don't you just say Moshe could eat it? He wasn't an onen, he was the uncle. Dil mashane Moshe is a great answer. Detarib b'shchina. He didn't have time to eat. He was busy with the shchina. Damar Moshe b'ashkama alav b'ashkama yarad. He would go up early in the morning. He would come down early. Okay, this is actually when he was getting the Torah on Sinai. He would go up, go down. He was always busy with God. Now, even now, we're not in the time of Matan Torah, but it was that time, he was, you think of Moshe Rabbeinu, he was busy dealing with things with God. He didn't have time to, don't give him, oh, here, you take the food and you eat it because we can't. He had higher things to be dealing with. Okay, second difficulty on Rav. Okay, that's done with our sugya. That's the connection to our sugya. But we have other difficulties. Tevet. Now we're going to get to this long source about kohanim baalei mumim. Kohen baal mum is allowed to eat kodshim. What is he allowed to eat? Lechem elohav, as the pasuk says, mikodshe kodashim umina kodashim yochal. It says they can eat kodshim and they can eat kodshim kalim. So the big question is, im nemru kodshe kodashim, lama nemru kodshim kalim? Im nemru kodshim kalim, lama nemru kodshe kodashim? Why don't you just say they can eat meat, right? Sacrificial meat. What's the difference? Kodshim kalim. You could have learned one from the other. Now we're going to prove you couldn't have learned either one from the other. Ilu lo nemru kodshim kalim, ayiti omer kodshim hudochel. If it didn't say kodshim kalim, you might have thought maybe they can only eat kodshim. Sharehu tru. Now why? It's a little bit weird to think that, but why only kodshim? Because there's a place where we see there's a heter lizal v'lahen. You would say, hey, there's somewhere else. Where is that? Moshe, we're going to assume. Moshe Rabbeinu ate kodshim. That was from the Elam miluim, and he was a zar. He was a non-kohen. That's going to be our problem. Because what do you mean Moshe was a... Rav just said Moshe was a kohen gadol. Here we're saying, oh no, Moshe wasn't a kohen gadol. He was a non-kohen, and he was allowed to eat the kodshim. So maybe you would think that baalei mumim were only allowed to eat what we have some sort of precedent for someone who's a non-kohen eating it. Kodshim kalim lo yochal. Maybe we don't have any place where zar eats kodshim kalim. Now, when we mean kodshim kalim, we mean the parts that go to the kohen from the kodshim kalim, like the chazeh and the shok. Ve'ilu lo ne'emru kodshe kodashim. If it didn't say kodshe kodashim, ayiti omer kodshe kalim ye'ochel shem kalim. Kodshe kodashim lo ye'ochel. Now that's obvious, right? If you say they can eat the lighter ones, you might have thought, well, maybe they can't eat the more serious sanctity ones, the kodshe kodashim. L'chach ne'emru kodshe kodashim, l'chach ne'emru kodashim kalim. That's why we need both. Anyway, the only line we need here is katani miat sharei utchul zar v'lahen lav Moshe. Right? Is that not Moshe that we're talking about? Because what other zar ever ate kodshim? So it must be Moshe. No, Amar of Sheshet lo bibama lizal u'kedivrei ha'omer yesh mincha bibama. But this will end today. Rav Sheshet says no. The zar who can eat kodshim is in the time of bamot when you can sacrifice outside the temple. If you hold, now this is only if you hold, you could bring a mincha offering and in the at bamot. Mincha offerings are kodshim. Okay, so mincha offerings can be eaten by a zar if you bring them on the bamot. So there is some place where kodshim can be eaten by a zar, and that's not Moshe, and that doesn't raise difficulty with Rav. But we're not finished with the difficulties on Rav. We're going to get to some more, and with this we'll continue tomorrow. Okay, so the daf we already summarized, so I'm going to leave it here, right? We just ended with this Pinchas. From there we got off on, is Pinchas a kohen or not? And from there we got to, is Moshe a kohen? Right? Rav says he was, but that seemed to contradict. Why didn't he eat the meat then? But no, he couldn't eat the meat because he was busy with more godly things. And then from there we got off on other difficulties against Rav. Without wishing everyone a good day.